It was a crisp autumn morning in a small Midwestern town, the kind of place where everyone knew each other by name, and life moved at a predictable pace. The air smelled faintly of fallen leaves, and the streets were quiet except for the occasional rumble of a tractor or the laughter of kids playing outside. Everything seemed normal until she walked into the bank. She wasn't like the usual customers who came in wearing flannel shirts or faded jeans. This woman stood out immediately. She was tall with an elegant posture that made her look regal even in casual clothes. Her dark skin glowed under the fluorescent lights of the bank, and her calm demeanor commanded attention without her saying a word. People couldn't help but notice her as she approached the teller counter. In her hand she held a single piece of paper, a check. It didn't look extraordinary at first glance, just a plain slip of paper folded neatly. But when she handed it over to the teller, something strange happened. The teller froze, staring at the screen in disbelief. A murmur rippled through the room as other employees leaned closer, trying to catch a glimpse of what had caused the reaction. The amount on the check read $20 million. Now, if you've ever worked in a small-town bank, you'll know that checks like this don't come across your desk every day. In fact, they almost never do. So naturally, eyebrows went up, heads turned, and whispers filled the air. Was this some kind of prank or maybe a mistake? Nobody could believe their eyes. That's when the bank manager stepped out of his office. His name isn't important here, but let's just say he was the kind of guy who wore expensive suits and carried himself with an air of authority. He liked to think of himself as the smartest person in the room, and he prided himself on keeping things running smoothly. But today, his smooth routine was about to get shaken up. He walked over to the counter, his polished shoes clicking against the tiled floor. As soon as he saw the number on the screen, his expression changed. At first, there was shock. His eyes widened slightly, and his jaw tightened. Then, almost instantly, skepticism crept onto his face. He tilted his head, studying the woman carefully, as though trying to figure out whether she was trustworthy or not. Finally, he spoke. "Excuse me," he said, interrupting the transaction. His tone was polite, but there was a hint of condescension underneath. "There seems to be an issue here. Perhaps you're mistaken about the value written on this check." The woman didn't flinch. She looked at him directly, her gaze steady and unwavering. There was no anger in her eyes, only calm, confidence. "Oh, there's no mistake," she replied softly, her voice carrying a quiet strength. "But I can see why you might find it hard to believe." Her words hung in the air, leaving everyone around them curious. Who was this woman, and why did she have a check worth millions? The manager cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. He glanced around the room, noticing the stares from other customers. Some looked intrigued, while others seemed skeptical. Whatever the case, he knew he needed to handle this situation quickly before it got out of control. "Let's take this to my office," he suggested, gesturing toward the glass-walled room behind him. His smile was forced, but he tried to appear professional. "We can verify everything there." Without hesitation, the woman followed him. She moved gracefully, her steps measured and deliberate. If she felt any unease about being singled out, she didn't show it. Instead, she exuded an aura of quiet power that made people sit up and pay attention. As they disappeared into the office, the murmurs grew louder. Everyone in the lobby wondered what was going on. Was this some elaborate scam? Or was the woman really as rich as the check claimed? No one could agree on anything except one thing. This was unlike anything they'd ever seen before. Inside the office, the manager closed the door behind them and sat down at his desk. He pulled out a clipboard and pretended to examine the check closely. But deep down, he already knew what he thought of the situation, and it wasn't favorable. "You must understand," he began, leaning back in his chair and crossing his arms. "Checks like this, they don't just fall into people's laps, especially not someone like you." The moment the words left his mouth, he realized he'd crossed a line. The phrase, "someone like you," lingered awkwardly between them, heavy, with implications. For a brief second, he wondered if he should apologize, but then pride kicked in, and he decided to push forward instead. To his surprise, the woman didn't react angrily. Instead, she smiled, a slow, knowing smile that sent a chill down his spine. "Someone like me?" she repeated, her voice soft, but piercing. "What exactly do you mean by that?" Her question caught him off guard. He opened his mouth to respond, but found himself fumbling for words. Suddenly, he felt exposed, as though she could see right through him. And maybe she could. "Well," he finally managed to say, his voice less confident now. "You seem ordinary, not exactly the type who'd have access to such wealth." For the first time since walking into the bank, the woman's expression shifted. Her smile widened, but there was something else in her eyes, something sharp and unyielding. "Ordinary, am I?" she said, tilting her head slightly. "Well, perhaps appearances aren't everything, Mr. Bank Manager." And with those words, the game changed entirely. Little did the manager know he was about to learn a lesson he would never forget, one that would challenge everything he thought he knew about people, success, and himself. The bank manager leaned back in his chair, trying to act calm, but inside his mind was racing. He had spent years climbing the corporate ladder, working late nights, and dealing with difficult customers. He thought he'd seen it all. Fraudulent checks, identity theft, even people trying to deposit lottery winnings they didn't win. But this was something else entirely. A $20 million check presented by a woman who looked like she belonged in a coffee shop rather than a boardroom. It just didn't add up in his head. He glanced at her again, studying her closely. She wasn't flashy or loud. No designer handbag rested on her lap. No oversized watch sparkled on her wrist. Her clothes were simple but elegant, and her demeanor was relaxed, almost too relaxed for someone claiming to carry millions in paper form. To him, she looked ordinary, too ordinary, and that's what made him suspicious. "Well," he said, clearing his throat and sitting up straighter in his chair, "let's cut to the chase. You'll need to provide identification to verify this transaction." His tone was polite but firm, the kind of tone he used when he wanted to assert authority without sounding rude. He expected her to hesitate, maybe even get defensive. After all, most people would be nervous if questioned about a check that large, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out 2 items, a sleek black card and her driver's license. She placed them on his desk without hesitation, as though she'd been expecting this moment all along. The manager picked up the ID first, squinting at the details. Then he turned his attention to the black card. At first glance, it looked like any other credit card, but something about its design caught his eye. A small emblem etched into the corner, one he vaguely recognized. His eyes widened as realization dawned on him. That emblem belonged to Global Tech Innovations, a company he'd read about in business magazines. It was a tech giant, known for revolutionizing industries with cutting-edge artificial intelligence and sustainable energy solutions. The CEO of Global Tech was a name he'd heard before, though he couldn't quite place it at the moment. Still, he assumed it must be some older white guy in Silicon Valley, someone who fit the stereotype of a billionaire entrepreneur. He flipped the card over and froze. Printed neatly on the front was the title, CEO and Founder. Below it was the name, Dr. Evelyn Carter. For a moment, his brain refused to process what he was seeing. He blinked once, twice, then looked up at the woman sitting across from him. Her expression hadn't changed. She still wore that same calm, knowing smile. But now, everything clicked into place. This wasn't just some random person walking into his bank. This was the Dr. Evelyn Carter, the woman who had built a multi-billion-dollar empire from scratch, whose innovations had earned her accolades from world leaders and tech pioneers alike. Harold, we'll call him that for simplicity, felt his stomach drop. All the confidence he'd walked into the room with evaporated instantly. He opened his mouth to say something, anything. But no, words came out. Instead, he stammered, fumbling over his sentences like a nervous teenager. I didn't realize, it's just..." Evelyn raised an eyebrow, her gaze steady and piercing. "Didn't realize what?" she asked quietly, her voice smooth, but laced with steel. That a black woman could build something extraordinary, or that someone who looks like me could hold more power than you ever will. Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. For a split second, Harold forgot how to breathe. He wanted to defend himself, to explain that he wasn't prejudiced, that he was just doing his job. But deep down, he knew better. He could feel the truth of her statement sinking in, heavy and undeniable. His initial reaction hadn't been based on logic or evidence. It had been shaped by assumptions. Assumptions about who deserved wealth, who possessed power, and who belonged in certain spaces. "I'm sorry," he finally managed to choke out, his voice barely above a whisper. "I truly am." Evelyn didn't respond right away. She simply watched him, letting the weight of the moment settle between them. When she finally spoke, her tone softened slightly, though it remained firm. "You know," she said, leaning forward slightly, "apologies are easy. What matters is whether you learn from this, whether you recognize your own biases and work to change them." Harold nodded quickly, too embarrassed to meet her eyes. He felt exposed, vulnerable in a way he hadn't experienced in years. Here he was, the man in charge of a bank, reduced to a bumbling mess because of his own ignorance. But Evelyn wasn't done yet. "Let me tell you something," she continued, her voice taking on a reflective tone. "When I started my journey, people doubted me at every turn. They told me I couldn't succeed because of where I came from, because of the color of my skin, because of my gender. Some laughed outright. Others dismissed me politely. But I kept going, not because I wanted to prove them wrong, but because I believed in myself and my vision." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Success isn't about proving anyone wrong. It's about staying true to who you are even when the world tries to convince you otherwise. And trust me, Mr. Bank Manager, there's nothing more powerful than authenticity." By the time she finished speaking, Harold felt a mix of emotions swirling inside him: shame, admiration, and a strange sense of gratitude. Gratitude not because she had humiliated him, but because she had given him a chance to reflect on his actions. He realized then that this encounter wasn't just about a check or a transaction. It was about perspective, about understanding the impact of our biases and how they shape the way we treat others. "I'll make sure this gets processed immediately," he said, standing up and reaching for the phone on his desk. "And I'll personally oversee it to ensure there are no further issues." Evelyn nodded, satisfied with his response. "Thank you," she said simply, rising from her chair. "But remember, this isn't just about me. It's about everyone who walks through those doors. Everyone deserves respect, regardless of how they look or where they come from." With that, she turned and left the office, leaving Harold alone with his thoughts. As he watched her walk away, he couldn't help but feel a newfound respect for her. Not just as a successful entrepreneur, but as a human being who carried herself with grace and dignity, even in the face of prejudice. Outside, the lobby had grown quieter. People were still whispering, but now their murmurs carried a different tone, one of awe and admiration. Evelyn stepped out of the bank, disappearing into the crisp autumn air, leaving behind a story that would soon spread far beyond the walls of that small-town branch. For Harold, however, the day was far from over. The lessons he'd learned, and the changes he needed to make, were only beginning. The bank manager sat in his office long after Evelyn had left, staring blankly at the papers on his desk. The room felt smaller than usual, the air heavier. His mind replayed every moment of their conversation, the way she'd calmly dismantled his assumptions, the sharpness of her words, and the quiet authority in her voice. He couldn't shake the feeling that he'd been caught off guard, not just by her identity but by his own behavior. For years, Harold had prided himself on being fair and professional. He saw himself as a reasonable man, someone who treated everyone equally. But now, sitting alone in the silence of his office, he realized how wrong he'd been. Equality wasn't about treating everyone the same. It was about recognizing and addressing the biases that shaped his decisions. And today, those biases had been laid bare for him to see. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. What would people think when they found out what had happened? Word traveled fast in a small town like this, and the incident with Evelyn was already starting to spread. Employees whispered among themselves, customers exchanged knowing glances, and social media buzzed with speculation. By tomorrow morning, the story would likely be everywhere. Harold knew he couldn't ignore it. This wasn't just about damage control for the bank, it was personal. He had embarrassed himself, yes, but more importantly, he had disrespected someone who deserved nothing less than respect. The thought gnawed at him, making it impossible to focus on anything else. Determined to make things right, Harold picked up the phone and dialed the bank's PR department. "We need to issue a statement," he told them firmly. "Something transparent, something honest. No sugarcoating, just the truth." The PR team hesitated, unsure if such an approach would work. In situations like this, most companies tried to downplay mistakes or shift blame elsewhere. But Harold insisted. "If we try to hide this, it'll only get worse," he said. "People deserve to know what happened and how we plan to fix it." While the PR team worked on crafting the statement, Harold decided to take another step. He reached out to Evelyn directly, not through email or text, but with a handwritten letter. It was old-fashioned, maybe even a little awkward, but he wanted her to know he was sincere. In the letter, he apologized again, not just for doubting her check, but for doubting her. He acknowledged his bias and admitted that he had let preconceived notions cloud his judgment. Then he asked if she would be willing to meet with him again, not to defend himself, but to discuss how the bank could do better moving forward. To his surprise, Evelyn agreed. She suggested meeting at a community forum she was hosting later that week on diversity and inclusion in corporate America. At first, Harold balked at the idea. Speaking publicly about his mistake sounded terrifying, but Evelyn assured him it was the right thing to do. "Change starts with accountability," she told him over the phone. "And sometimes the hardest conversations are the ones worth having." The day of the forum arrived faster than Harold expected. As he stood backstage, fidgeting with his tie and rehearsing his speech for the 100th time, he couldn't help but feel nervous. The auditorium was packed. Local residents, business owners, activists, and even reporters filled the seats. A large screen displayed the event's title, "Breaking Barriers, Building a More Inclusive Future." When Evelyn took the stage, the crowd erupted into applause. She looked radiant, wearing a tailored suit that exuded confidence without overshadowing her warmth. She began by sharing her journey, starting from humble beginnings in a working-class neighborhood to becoming one of the most influential figures in modern technology. Her story was inspiring, filled with moments of struggle and triumph that resonated deeply with the audience. "I didn't get here alone," she said, pausing to let her words sink in. "I had mentors who believed in me, allies who stood by my side, and communities that supported me. But I also faced countless obstacles. Obstacles rooted in prejudice and stereotypes. Obstacles that made me question whether I truly belonged." She went on to talk about the importance of representation and the need for institutions to reflect the diversity of the people they served. "It's not enough to say you welcome everyone," she emphasized. "You have to show it, through your policies, your practices, and your leadership." As she wrapped up her speech, she turned to Harold, inviting him to join her on stage. The room fell silent as he stepped forward, visibly uneasy but determined. For a moment, all eyes were on him, judging, waiting to hear what he had to say. Harold cleared his throat, gripping the microphone tightly. "First, let me start by saying thank you to Dr. Carter for giving me this opportunity to speak, and to all of you for being here today. I won't pretend that this is easy for me. Facing your own flaws never is, but it's necessary." He recounted the events of that day at the bank, holding nothing back. He admitted his skepticism, his bias, and the harm his actions had caused. "I judged someone based on appearances instead of facts," he confessed. "And in doing so, I failed, not just as a banker but as a human being." His voice wavered slightly, but he pressed on. "What I learned from Dr. Carter is that success isn't defined by titles or wealth. It's defined by character, by how we treat others, especially when they challenge our assumptions, and by our willingness to grow even when it's uncomfortable. By the time Harold finished speaking, the room was silent, but not the kind of silence that comes from judgment. It was the silence of reflection, of understanding. Slowly, the audience began to clap, their applause growing louder until it echoed throughout the auditorium. Some people even stood, showing their support not just for Evelyn but for Harold's courage to admit his mistakes. After the forum ended, several attendees approached Harold to share their thoughts. Some thanked him for his honesty. Others offered advice on how the bank could improve its inclusivity efforts. One elderly woman patted his arm gently and said, "We all mess up, son. What matters is what you do next." Back at the bank, the following week, Harold wasted no time putting his words into action. He called a staff meeting to address the incident openly, encouraging employees to share their experiences and perspectives. Together, they brainstormed ways to create a more welcoming environment for customers of all backgrounds. Training sessions on unconscious bias became mandatory for everyone, from tellers to executives. The bank partnered with local organizations to offer financial literacy programs in underserved communities. And perhaps most importantly, Harold made it clear that accountability would be a cornerstone of the institution's culture moving forward. Evelyn kept tabs on the progress, occasionally visiting the bank to check in. Each time, Harold greeted her warmly, grateful for the lessons she had taught him, not just about running a business but about leading with integrity. As months passed, the bank transformed, not overnight but steadily. Customers noticed the EEI difference, praising the staff for their attentiveness and respect. Employees felt empowered to speak up about issues they cared about, knowing their voices would be heard. And Harold, he carried himself differently now, with humility and purpose. Looking back, he realized that the day Evelyn walked into his bank wasn't just a turning point for him, it was a catalyst for change. Change that started with a single check, but grew into something far greater. The weeks following the community forum were a whirlwind for Harold. For the first time in his career, he found himself questioning not just his actions, but the very foundation of how he viewed people and success. The encounter with Evelyn had shaken him to his core, forcing him to confront truths he'd rather have ignored. But instead of retreating into denial or defensiveness, Harold chose to lean into the discomfort. He knew this was his chance, not just to redeem himself, but to make a real difference. Change wasn't easy, though, it never is. When Harold announced his plans to overhaul the bank's policies and practices, he faced resistance from unexpected corners. Some employees grumbled about the new training sessions, calling them unnecessary or a waste of time. Few senior staff members rolled their eyes during meetings, muttering under their breath that all this talk of bias and inclusion was just a trend. Even some longtime customers expressed skepticism, asking why the bank suddenly cared so much about political correctness. But Harold didn't back down. He understood that resistance came from fear of the unknown, fear of being called out, fear of having to change habits ingrained over decades. So he decided to tackle these fears head-on. Instead of simply mandating new rules, he started small, focusing on building trust and understanding within the team. One of the first things he did was organize informal coffee chats between employees and local community leaders. These weren't formal meetings, they were casual conversations where people could share their stories and perspectives. At one such gathering, an older woman who ran a nonprofit for single mothers spoke about the challenges she faced when trying to secure loans for her clients. Her words resonated deeply with many of the younger employees who began to see the bank not just as a business, but as a part of the community it served. Harold also invited Evelyn back to the bank, not as a critic, but as a mentor. She agreed, seeing it as an opportunity to guide the institution toward meaningful transformation. During her visits, she shared insights from her own journey, emphasizing the importance of empathy and adaptability in leadership. Success isn't just about numbers, she told the staff during one session. It's about impact, about leaving things better than you found them. Her presence inspired everyone, from the interns to the executives. Slowly but surely, attitudes began to shift. Employees started approaching their work with fresh eyes, looking for ways to serve customers more effectively. They implemented simple yet impactful changes, like offering translation services for non-English speakers and creating flexible payment plans for struggling families. Each step might have seemed small on its own, but together, they added up to something significant. Meanwhile, word of the bank's efforts spread beyond the town. Local newspapers wrote articles praising the institution's commitment to inclusivity. Social media buzzed with positive comments from customers who appreciated the newfound respect and care they received. One viral post featured a young man sharing how the bank helped him start a small business, despite his lack of credit history. "They didn't just give me a loan," he wrote. "They believed in me when no one else did." Of course, not everything went smoothly. There were setbacks along the way, misunderstandings, missteps, moments when old biases resurfaced. But instead of sweeping these incidents under the rug, Harold encouraged transparency. Whenever a customer or employee raised a concern, he addressed it openly, using it as a learning opportunity for everyone involved. This approach earned him both respect and loyalty, qualities that money couldn't buy. As the months passed, Harold noticed a subtle but profound shift in the atmosphere at the bank. People laughed more, collaborated better, and took pride in their work. Customers lingered longer, chatting with tellers and sharing updates about their lives. What had once been a sterile, transactional space now felt alive, with connection, purpose, and hope. One day, while reviewing feedback forms from recent visitors, Harold came across a comment that stopped him in his tracks. It read, "This bank doesn't just handle my finances, it feels like it cares about my future." Reading those words, Harold realized they encapsulated everything he'd been striving for. Success wasn't measured by profits alone. It was measured by the lives touched and transformed. Evelyn continued to play a pivotal role in the bank's evolution. Though she remained busy with her global ventures, she made time to check in regularly, offering guidance and encouragement. On one visit, she pulled Harold aside after a meeting and said, "You've come a long way since that day. Don't stop, now." Her words stayed with him, fueling his determination to keep pushing forward. He knew the journey wasn't over, that there would always be room for improvement, but he also knew they were on the right path. To celebrate the progress they'd made, Harold organized a special event at the bank, a day dedicated to honoring the community. Local artists displayed their work in the lobby, musicians performed, live and food trucks lined the parking lot. Families gathered laughing and enjoying themselves while bank employees mingled with customers, forging connections that went beyond balance sheets and account numbers. At the heart of the celebration stood a mural commissioned by the bank. Painted by a local artist, it depicted scenes of diversity and unity, hands reaching out to help one another, faces of different ages and backgrounds coming together in harmony. Beneath the mural, a plaque read, "Together, we build a brighter future." Standing there, surrounded by the vibrant energy of the crowd, Harold felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He thought back to that fateful morning when Evelyn walked into the bank, holding a $20 million check that challenged everything he thought he knew. Back then, he couldn't have imagined how much that single moment would change his life, and the lives of so many others. Looking ahead, Harold knew there would still be challenges. Change was never linear, and setbacks were inevitable. But he also knew that true growth came from embracing those challenges, learning from them, and emerging stronger on the other side. With Evelyn's wisdom guiding him and a team committed to making a difference, he felt ready to face whatever lay ahead. The story of the $20 million check had become more than just a tale of mistaken assumptions. It had sparked a movement, a ripple effect of awareness, accountability, and action. And as Harold watched the sunset over the bustling celebration outside, he smiled, knowing that the best chapters were yet to be written. The transformation at the bank didn't happen overnight, and it wasn't always smooth sailing. There were moments when doubts crept in, for Harold, for the employees, and even for some members of the community. Change is messy, after all. It stirs up old fears, exposes hidden insecurities, and forces people to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves and the world around them. But through it all, one thing remained constant: the unwavering belief that progress was possible if everyone stayed committed to the journey. Harold had become a different person since the day Evelyn walked into his office. He no longer saw himself as just a bank manager. He saw himself as a leader, a role he took very seriously. Every decision he made now came with careful thought about its impact on others. Was this policy fair? Did it consider the needs of every customer? Would it help build trust or create barriers? These questions guided him daily, shaping not only how he ran the bank, but also how he interacted with the people around him. One of the biggest challenges Harold faced was dealing with skeptics, those who still clung to outdated ideas or resisted the changes happening within the institution. Some of these skeptics were longtime customers who felt uneasy about the bank's new focus on inclusivity. "Why are we suddenly bending over backward for certain groups?" one man asked during a heated exchange at the counter. His tone was sharp, tinged with frustration. "I've been banking here for 30 years, and I don't remember any of this special treatment back then." Harold could have dismissed the comment, written it off as ignorance, or instructed staff to handle the situation without him. But instead he chose to step in personally. Approaching the man with calmness and respect, he said, "Thank you for sharing your thoughts. Let me explain why these changes matter, not just to some people, but to all of us." He went on to describe how the bank aimed to serve everyone equally, regardless of background or circumstances. He shared examples of how small adjustments, like offering financial literacy workshops in multiple languages or providing flexible payment options, had helped families thrive. And he emphasized that these efforts weren't about favoritism. They were about leveling the playing field so that everyone had a fair shot at success. By the end of their conversation, the man didn't walk away completely convinced, but he did leave with a better understanding of where Harold was coming from. More importantly, he left feeling heard, which was half the battle. Over time, many skeptics softened their stance, realizing that the changes weren't threats but opportunities for growth, connection, and mutual benefit. Another challenge came from within the bank itself. While most employees embraced the new initiatives enthusiastically, a few struggled to adapt. One teller in particular found it difficult to break old habits. She often referred to customers by generic terms like sir or ma'am, avoiding names altogether because she worried about mispronouncing them. Another avoided engaging with non-English-speaking clients, fearing she might say something wrong. When Harold noticed these patterns, he didn't reprimand anyone. Instead, he organized additional training sessions focused on empathy and communication. Role-playing exercises allowed employees to practice handling diverse situations, while guest speakers shared personal stories about the importance of feeling seen and valued. Slowly but surely, the hesitant employees began to open up, gaining confidence in their ability to connect with customers authentically. The turning point came during a particularly memorable interaction. A young immigrant couple entered the bank seeking advice on opening their first savings account. They spoke broken English and seemed nervous, glancing around uncertainly. The same teller who had once shied away from such encounters greeted them warmly, taking extra care to ensure they understood each step of the process. By the time they left, the couple was smiling broadly, thanking her profusely for her patience and kindness. That evening, the teller approached Harold, visibly moved. "I never realized how much of a difference I could make," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "It feels good knowing I can help someone feel welcome, even if it's just in a small way." Moments like these reminded Harold why he had embarked on this journey in the first place. It wasn't about ticking boxes or meeting quotas. It was about creating an environment where everyone felt respected and empowered. And as more and more employees experienced similar breakthroughs, the culture of the bank continued to evolve. Evelyn played a crucial role in keeping the momentum going. Though her schedule kept her traveling across the globe, she made it a point to check in regularly, either through video calls or brief visits. Her presence was a source of inspiration for everyone at the bank. She reminded them that change wasn't linear. It was a process full of ups and downs, but that perseverance would ultimately lead to meaningful results. During one of her visits, she sat down with Harold to review the bank's progress. Together, they discussed what was working well and identified areas that still needed improvement. "You've done incredible work," she told him, her tone warm but firm. "But don't let complacency creep in. Keep pushing boundaries. Keep asking tough questions. That's how real growth happens." Her words resonated deeply with Harold. He realized that while the bank had come a long way, there was still so much more to be done. So, he doubled down on his efforts, introducing new programs aimed at fostering economic empowerment in underserved communities. For example, the bank partnered with local schools to teach students about saving, budgeting, and investing. They also launched a microloan initiative designed to support aspiring entrepreneurs who lacked access to traditional funding. These initiatives didn't just benefit the recipients, they enriched the entire community. As businesses flourished and families grew financially stable, the town itself began to transform. Vacant storefronts filled with new shops, parks buzzed with activity, and neighbors greeted each other with genuine warmth. The bank, once seen as just another corporate entity, became a cornerstone of hope and possibility. As the months turned into years, Harold reflected on how far they'd come. What started as a single incident, a $20 million check that challenged assumptions, had blossomed into a movement that touched countless lives. The bank wasn't perfect, and neither was Harold. Mistakes still happened, lessons still needed to be learned, and biases still surfaced occasionally. But the key difference was that now, they faced those challenges head-on, using them as opportunities to grow stronger and wiser. Looking back, Harold often thought about the ripple effect of that fateful morning. If Evelyn hadn't walked into the bank that day, would any of this have happened? Probably not. Her courage, grace, and wisdom had sparked a chain reaction that extended far beyond the walls of the institution. She had shown Harold and everyone else that true leadership wasn't about wielding power. It was about empowering others. And perhaps that was the greatest lesson of all. That change begins with a single moment, a single choice, a single act of bravery. From there, it spreads outward, touching hearts, shifting perspectives, and building bridges where none existed before. Years had passed since the day Evelyn walked into the bank with her $20 million check. What started as a moment of tension and misunderstanding had grown into something far greater, a legacy of transformation that touched not just the bank, but the entire community. Harold often found himself reflecting on how much had changed, not just in the institution he led, but within himself. The small-town bank was no longer just a place where people deposited paychecks or paid bills. It had become a hub of connection, growth, and opportunity. The walls of the building seemed to hum with life, filled with stories of triumph, resilience, and collaboration. Customers didn't just see it as a financial institution, they saw it as a partner in their dreams and aspirations. For Harold, this shift meant more than any profit margin ever could. One crisp autumn morning, fittingly similar to the one all those years ago, Harold stood outside the bank, watching as employees and volunteers prepared for an annual event called Community Day. This celebration had become a tradition, drawing hundreds of people from across the region. There were booths set up offering free financial advice, workshops led by local entrepreneurs, and activities designed to bring families together. The highlight of the day was always the keynote speech, delivered by someone who embodied the spirit of progress and inclusivity. This year, Evelyn had agreed to return as the guest speaker. Her presence alone guaranteed a packed house, but what truly drew people in was the promise of hearing her insights once again. As Harold greeted her at the entrance, he couldn't help but smile. She looked just as poised and radiant as she had during their first encounter, though her demeanor carried even more warmth now. Over the years, their relationship had evolved from one of accountability to genuine friendship. "You've done amazing work here," Evelyn said as they walked through the bustling crowd. "It's inspiring to see how much has changed." Harold shook his head modestly. "None of it would have happened without you," he replied. You opened my eyes to things I never wanted to see and gave me the courage to do something about them." Evelyn chuckled softly. "I didn't do anything special," she said. "I just reminded you of what you already knew deep down, that everyone deserves respect no matter who they are or where they come from." Her words struck a chord, as they always did. Harold realized that while Evelyn had ignited the spark, the real work, the hard, messy, beautiful process of change, had been driven by the collective effort of everyone involved. From the employees who embraced new ways of thinking to the customers who trusted the bank enough to give it another chance, each person played a vital role in shaping its future. Later that afternoon, Evelyn took the stage to deliver her speech. The audience sat in rapt attention, eager to hear what she had to say. She began by acknowledging the progress the town had made over the years, highlighting specific examples of individuals and businesses that had thrived thanks to the bank's initiatives. But she didn't dwell on praise for long. Instead, she turned her focus to the bigger picture, the ongoing fight for equality and justice in every corner of society. "Change isn't easy," she said, her voice steady yet passionate. "It requires us to confront uncomfortable truths, to challenge systems that have existed for generations, and to hold ourselves accountable when we fall short. But most importantly, it requires hope. Hope that tomorrow can be better than today. Hope that we can leave the world a little kinder, a little fairer than we found it." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "When I walked into this bank years ago, I wasn't looking to make a statement. I simply wanted to conduct a transaction. But sometimes moments like that remind us of the power we hold, to shape perceptions, to break barriers, and to inspire others to do the same. And that's exactly what this community has done." As she wrapped up her speech, Evelyn turned to Harold, gesturing for him to join her on stage. Reluctantly, he stepped forward, feeling the weight of the spotlight once again. But instead of nerves, he felt gratitude for the journey, for the lessons learned, and for the people who had supported him along the way. "I want to thank Harold," Evelyn said, addressing the crowd. "Not because he got everything right from the start, he didn't, but because he chose to listen, to learn, and to grow. That takes courage, and it's something we should all strive to emulate." The audience erupted into applause, cheering not just for Harold but for the shared commitment to making the world a better place. As he stood there beside Evelyn, Harold felt a profound sense of fulfillment. He thought back to the man he used to be, the one who let biases cloud his judgment, and marveled at how far he'd come. None of it would have been possible without the people around him, pushing him to be better. After the event, Harold spent some time wandering through the festivities, soaking in the energy of the day. Children laughed as they played games, vendors exchanged friendly banter, and strangers struck up conversations that turned into connections. Everywhere he looked, he saw evidence of the ripple effect Evelyn had spoken about, the way one act of courage could inspire countless others. At one booth, a young woman caught his eye. She was handing out flyers for her startup, a sustainable fashion brand aimed at reducing waste in the industry. When Harold stopped to chat with her, she explained how the bank's microloan program had helped her turn her dream into reality. "I never thought I'd be able to start my own business," she admitted, her eyes shining with pride. "But your team believed in me when no one else did. That made all the difference." Hearing her story reminded Harold why he woke up every day determined to keep moving forward. Success wasn't measured by numbers or accolades. It was measured by the lives touched and transformed. And judging by the smiles and laughter surrounding him, the impact of their efforts was undeniable. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden hues over the town square, Harold found himself standing alone near the mural commissioned years ago. Its vibrant colors still popped against the brick wall, a testament to the unity and diversity it represented. Beneath the plaque reading, "Together, we build a brighter future," Harold whispered a quiet thank you to Evelyn, to his team, and to the community that had embraced the vision of a better tomorrow. He knew the journey wasn't over. There would always be challenges ahead, obstacles to overcome, and lessons to learn. But as long as there were people willing to stand together, committed to building bridges rather than walls, Harold believed anything was possible. And so, the story of the $20 million check came full circle, not as a tale of wealth or power, but as a reminder of the strength found in humility, empathy, and determination. It was proof that even in moments of conflict, seeds of change could take root. All it took was the courage to nurture them.